Poor receptionist treated him like a backpacker. Unaware, he was the millionaire owner of the hotel. The rain danced against the marble entrance of the Grand Plaza Hotel as Emma clutched her clipboard, trying to shield herself from the storm of guests. That's when she saw him. A man soaked to the bone, his tangled hair clinging to his face, a ragged backpack hanging from one shoulder. His sneakers squished against the lobby floor like they were surrendering. Emma rushed forward, her voice low but urgent, shielding him from the glaring stares of high society guests. "Sir, this hotel starts at $500 a night." She forced a polite smile. "There's a hostel down on 47th. It's much more affordable." He said nothing, only adjusted the frayed strap of his torn backpack. Emma hesitated, then quietly reached into her purse, pulling out a crumpled $5 bill. Her own lunch money. "Here, for a sandwich. You look hungry." The man finally met her eyes, and for a moment something flickered. Not shame, not desperation, but something far deeper, something she couldn't name. What Emma didn't know was that she had just offered lunch money to the billionaire owner of the very hotel she worked in. The storm outside should have drowned out everything, but inside Emma Rodriguez's chest there was only one sound: the frantic pounding of her own heart. It wasn't the rain, it wasn't the tourists filling the Grand Plaza Hotel lobby with their umbrellas and heavy designer bags. It wasn't even the sharp click of Louboutin heels echoing across the marble floor. It was him. The man standing there didn't belong in this world of crystal chandeliers and private chauffeurs. His damp clothes clung to him like paper. The backpack slumped on his shoulder looked like it had survived war zones. His beard was unkempt, his hair wild from the wind, but what struck Emma most were his eyes. Clear, still, and heartbreakingly beautiful. He looked lost, but not the kind of lost you see in tourists trying to find their rooms. This was a different kind of lost, as though life itself had stranded him. Emma swallowed, stealing a glance at Mrs. Wellington, one of their most prominent guests, already eyeing the man with disgust. Emma stepped forward before the situation could escalate. "Sir," she whispered, trying to guide him toward the side entrance, "this hotel may not be what you're looking for, but there's a hostel a few blocks down, much more affordable." The man simply adjusted his backpack. Raindrops trickled down his temple, yet he stood calmly, as if none of it touched him. Emma bit her lip, lowering her voice even more. "Here," she said, fumbling through her purse. She pulled out a small, crumpled bill, the $5.00 she had set aside for a sandwich after her shift. She didn't hesitate. "You look hungry. Please, take it." For a moment, he didn't move. Then, his hand reached forward, not to take the money, but simply to touch it lightly, like it was something fragile. "You're very kind," he said softly, his voice warm yet distant. The sound of his words struck her unexpectedly. This man didn't speak like someone living on the streets. His diction was perfect, his tone almost elegant. Emma's heart tightened. Maybe that's why she didn't notice Richard Morgan, the hotel manager, approaching behind her, or Tony from security, slowly stepping closer. Emma forced a professional smile, desperate to resolve the situation before it escalated into some kind of scene. "I can call a local shelter if you need somewhere safe for tonight. I'd like a room." The words stopped her cold. I'm sorry?" She blinked. "A room," he repeated calmly. "Here, in this hotel." Emma stole another glance around. Guests were watching now. Mrs. Wellington's lips were already curling into that signature expression of entitlement, the kind that would surely land on Yelp before sunrise. "Sir, our rooms start at $500 a night." He nodded. "That's fine." Emma blinked again. This didn't make sense. None of it made sense. "I'll need to verify your payment first," she said, her voice taking on the firm politeness that every front desk clerk in Manhattan mastered. He pulled out his wallet. It wasn't a wallet you'd expect a backpacker to have. Matte black, slim, and when he handed her the credit card, her heart jumped. It was a black card, the kind issued only to the ultra-wealthy. Emma's stomach twisted. Maybe it's stolen, maybe he found it on the street. She carefully ran it through the machine, Her heart thudded. Approved. No error, no fraud alert, no rejection, just approved. Still not convinced, Emma discreetly picked up the hotel phone and called the bank's verification line. She whispered the card numbers, watching him from the corner of her eye as he quietly studied the flower arrangements in the lobby. The bank officer's voice was cheerful. "Yes, ma'am. That account belongs to Mr. Michael Blackwood, VIP client. Unlimited credit." Emma froze. The name hit her like a gust of wind. Blackwood? As in Blackwood Hospitality Group? She almost dropped the phone. Her breath quickened, but she forced herself to stay composed. After all, it couldn't be that Blackwood, right? Just a coincidence, surely. "Everything went through, sir," she said as she hung up, her voice unusually shaky. "I'll just need your ID for our records." The man calmly handed her a driver's license. The name matched. The photo, though with shorter hair and clean-shaven, was unmistakably him. Michael Blackwood. He wasn't just a guest. He was the owner. The man standing before her, who she had just offered $5.00 and directions to a homeless shelter, owned this entire hotel. Emma felt lightheaded. She quickly gathered herself, printed his registration documents, and handed him the room key. "Presidential suite, top floor. Enjoy your stay, Mr. Blackwood." Michael's eyes twinkled, almost playfully, but he said nothing. "Emma," came the voice of Richard Morgan as he approached, confusion flickering in his expression. "Everything all right?" Before she could answer, Richard's eyes landed on Michael, and everything about his face shifted, from polite confusion to instant deference. "Mr. Blackwood," he breathed. We weren't expecting you back so soon. I hope everything was to your satisfaction?" Emma's stomach flipped. Michael simply nodded, his voice even. "Very eye-opening, Richard, quite different from what I'm used to." And with that, he turned toward the elevators, the torn backpack slung across his shoulder, walking as if the entire world still somehow belonged to him. Emma stood frozen behind the front desk, her head spinning as the reality of what had just happened finally landed like a storm surge crashing into her chest. She had tried to rescue a billionaire. Chapter 1, The Billionaire Backpacker. The elevators closed with a soft sigh, carrying Michael Blackwood to the top floor. But Emma Rodriguez remained frozen at the front desk, her hands still clutching the computer mouse, as if releasing it would make the last 10 minutes feel real. She had offered $5.00 to her billionaire boss. She had tried to rescue a man who probably made that much interest every second. Emma's pulse hammered in her ears, cheeks still flushed with the heat of embarrassment. Her fingers trembled as she clicked into the system to finalize his check-in. But even as she typed, her mind spun. Michael Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Hospitality, the owner of not just the Grand Plaza but 43 luxury hotels around the world. His name was printed on the gold-lettered investor plaques near the lobby entrance. She passed it every day, never imagining she'd one day hand him a crumpled $5 bill. And now? He was here, in her lobby, wearing hiking boots that left a trail of dried mud across the marble floor, carrying a backpack that looked one step from disintegration. "Emma?" Richard's voice pulled her back. He stood beside her now, lowering his voice so the guests wouldn't overhear, his forehead creased with concern. What exactly happened down here? Ella struggled to find words, still mentally replaying the surreal exchange. I thought he was lost or homeless. I didn't know who he was." Richard exhaled. "We should have been informed about his arrival. He usually travels with full security and an entourage. Not this." His voice trailed off as he stared at the elevator display, climbing steadily toward the penthouse. Emma whispered, "Why would a billionaire show up like that?" Richard shook his head. "Michael Blackwood is complicated." He glanced sideways at her. "You didn't offend him, did you?" "I offered him lunch money." Richard paled slightly. "Oh God." Emma bit her lip. He didn't seem angry. If anything, I think he was amused. Richard let out a tight breath. That's either very good or very bad. Upstairs, the elevator chimed as Michael stepped into the penthouse suite. The air smelled of lavender and polished cedarwood. Glass walls framed a breathtaking view of Manhattan's night skyline, a glittering city pulsing beneath him. He dropped his backpack onto the leather sofa and unzipped it. Inside were only a few shirts, a worn journal, and the hiking boots he'd been living in for weeks. 3 weeks alone in Colorado had stripped him of his perfectly tailored life. No board meetings, no investor dinners, no cameras, just silence, trees, sky, breathing. But it hadn't prepared him for her. Emma Rodriguez, the receptionist who had seen him as a man who needed help, not as a billionaire, not as Blackwood, just as someone. Her kindness was unexpected, disarming. She hadn't asked for anything, hadn't recognized him. And for the first time in years, someone saw nothing but a man standing in front of her and chose compassion. He smiled faintly, recalling the way she'd fumbled through her purse to give him that $5 bill. He hadn't felt that small or that human in a very long time. The next morning, Emma arrived early for her shift, her mind still fogged from restless sleep. She had debated calling in sick. After all, how was she supposed to face him again? The man probably thought she was ridiculous. Worse, she was now the receptionist who tried to give the billionaire CEO bus fare. Her stomach knotted as she approached the desk. Tony, head of security, glanced at her and offered a sympathetic smile. "You good?" Emma exhaled sharply. Surviving. But her pulse quickened as the elevator doors chimed and opened again. Michael stepped into the lobby, wearing fresh clothes but still exuding that same unbothered ease. No designer suit, no polished shoes, just simple dark jeans and a plain white button-up shirt rolled to his elbows. Every guest in the lobby seemed to notice him, not for who he was, but simply because his presence demanded attention without trying. Emma stood straighter behind the desk, forcing a smile as he approached. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood." Her voice trembled slightly on his name. His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. There was something unreadable behind them, not judgment, not arrogance, but something softer, almost entertained. "Good morning, Emma." His voice was calm, warm. "Thank you again for your kindness last night." Emma flushed. "Of course, I didn't know who you were." That's exactly why it mattered. His words were simple, but they landed in her chest like a weight. She wasn't sure whether to be relieved or mortified. Before she could respond, Richard rushed over, his voice professional but nervous. "Mr. Blackwood, your suite is fully prepared. If there's anything you need, please don't hesitate." Michael raised a hand gently, cutting him off. His gaze never left Emma. "Actually," he said, his voice smooth, "I may need a bit of guidance while I'm here." Emma blinked. "Guidance?" He smiled. "Yes, let's just say I may need a few lessons in fitting in." And with that, Emma's world quietly shifted into something she could not yet fully understand, and would never be able to forget. The etiquette lessons begin. Emma stood in the break room, stirring her coffee, her nerves still humming from that strange conversation earlier. Guidance. That was the word he'd used. As if the billionaire CEO needed her to show him anything. She replayed the scene again and again, the way his eyes had held hers, how calm and disarming his smile had been. He didn't seem angry. If anything, it was like he was studying her. Amused. Almost grateful. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the cup to her lips. "Stop overthinking," she whispered to herself. It was just politeness. But deep down, she knew better. There was something else lingering in that moment, something unspoken, unexplainable. When she returned to the lobby, Michael was already standing there, waiting. He wasn't like the other high-profile guests she'd seen. No air of entitlement, no bodyguards hovering, just calm, unbothered confidence. His jeans were crisp but simple. The white dress shirt perfectly pressed but absent of any brand labels screaming wealth. "Emma," he greeted her, his voice warm, gentle. "Good morning again, Mr. Blackwood." She forced a smile, still unsure what role she was supposed to play in this strange little arrangement. "Please," he said softly, "call me Michael." Emma hesitated. Okay. Michael." He smiled, as though pleased by the sound of his name on her lips. You mentioned guidance earlier, she ventured carefully. Were you serious about that? Thank you. He leaned slightly forward on the front desk counter, lowering his voice to almost a whisper, as if sharing a private secret. I've been out of touch lately. My time away was intentional, but now that I'm back, I find I may not be as polished as people expect me to be. His eyes gleamed with quiet amusement. And from what I gather, you seem rather skilled at navigating this world. Emma blinked. Me? You work here. You see these people every day. The billionaires, the influencers, the politicians. His voice lowered even more, teasingly conspiratorial. You know their rules better than they do. She couldn't help the small laugh that escaped her lips. I wouldn't call myself an expert. But you're honest, he said softly. That's far more valuable than expertise. For a moment, they simply stood there, the hum of the lobby fading behind the heavy weight of his words. Finally, Emma exhaled, trying to break the intensity of the moment. All right, then. If you really want lessons, I guess we can start with some basics. He smiled, straightening. Excellent. That afternoon, their first unofficial lesson began, in the most unlikely setting, the hotel restaurant. Emma had arranged for a quiet corner table away from curious eyes. She arrived first, nervously fidgeting with her necklace, scanning the menu to avoid appearing awkward. Moments later, Michael entered. Not a single guest failed to glance his way as he crossed the restaurant. Even without the polished exterior of a billionaire, his presence drew attention like a silent current. He sat across from her, offering a soft smile that seemed far too intimate for their barely formed acquaintance. Before we start, she said, trying to take control, I need you to understand something. Go on, he replied. I'm not qualified to teach a billionaire how to be rich, but I can show you how not to embarrass yourself in public. He chuckled. That's exactly what I need. Emma took a breath. Lesson 1, utensils. She picked up her fork and knife, demonstrating with the precision of someone who'd memorized the unspoken rules. Always use utensils properly, even for pizza, even for French fries if necessary. In places like this, casual food requires formal behavior. Michael grinned, clearly entertained. Even pizza? That feels criminal. It's survival, she deadpanned, especially at upscale events. Rich people don't eat with their hands. They perform eating. Everything is controlled, polite, and precise. He nodded, his eyes full of playful attention as he mirrored her demonstration, slicing into his food with comically exaggerated care. Emma fought back a laugh. Okay, maybe not that precise. You're not doing surgery. Michael's grin widened. I have a tendency to overcorrect. As they continued, the lesson slowly transformed into something else, into conversation. Easy, unexpected conversation. He asked about her life, where she was from, how she ended up in New York, why she chose hospitality. Emma kept her answers light, not wanting to expose too much. But even as she spoke, something inside her softened. She hadn't opened up like this to anyone in years. She told him about her student loans, about how she'd dreamed of opening her own bookstore cafe one day, but life had other plans, about how her parents worked themselves into exhaustion back home. Michael listened, really listened, not politely, not out of obligation, but like every word mattered. When the meal ended, Emma realized she hadn't touched her coffee once, too absorbed in his company to even notice the passing time. As they stood to leave, Michael surprised her again. Thank you, Emma. For what? For today. For your honesty, for treating me like a human being, not a name. His gaze held hers for a long beat. There was something about the way he looked at her that made her stomach flutter and her defenses tremble. You're welcome, she whispered. And as he walked away, Emma was left standing there, wondering how on earth a billionaire CEO could make her feel like she was the one being carefully studied, and not the other way around. Chapter 3. Training for the Elite. Emma stood outside Le Bernardin, her heart pounding harder than it had any right to. The famous Michelin-starred restaurant glittered behind her like a temple of privilege. She had only been inside once before, on a corporate holiday dinner, where she'd spent the entire evening terrified of using the wrong fork. Now she was here again, but this time she wasn't the guest. She was the teacher. And she was waiting for her student, Michael Blackwood. Just the thought made her chest tighten. She still couldn't wrap her mind around how surreal this had all become. Days ago, she thought he was homeless. Now she was coaching the billionaire CEO who owned the very hotel she worked in on how not to embarrass himself at fine dining. The man who didn't need her guidance at all, but for reasons that kept tugging at her heart, wanted it anyway. When Michael arrived, she almost didn't recognize him at first. Gone were the hiking boots, the threadbare backpack, and the wild mountain beard. Tonight, he wore a dark navy suit, simple but elegant, and a crisp white dress shirt. His hair was neatly combed, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence that no amount of money could fake. Yet his smile when he spotted her was still warm. Still disarming? "You clean up well," Emma teased, trying to keep her voice steady. "I had help," he replied, his voice gentle. "A certain receptionist recommended some fine shopping tactics, if I recall." She blushed slightly, looking away. "Tonight's your final exam, Blackwood. I hope I'd pass." As they walked inside, the maitre d' greeted them immediately, already recognizing Michael, but, just like the others, mistaking him for an ordinary guest, thanks to his earlier instructions. "Table for two, Mr. Blackwood, right this way." The soft lighting and the low hum of polite conversation wrapped around them as they took their seats. Silverware gleamed on the perfectly arranged table setting. Each wine glass sparkled beneath the chandelier's glow. Emma inhaled slowly, calming her nerves. "Okay," she whispered, leaning slightly across the table. "Rule 1, never place your napkin on the table after using it. Always keep it on your lap. Quietly, discreetly." Michael followed her lead, folding his napkin and resting it across his legs. "Rule 2, she continued, don't blow on the soup. Ever. Let it cool naturally." His lips twitched into a grin. "No blowing, got it." The waiter arrived with the menus, announcing the specials in that rhythmic, elegant way that seemed rehearsed but charming. Michael barely glanced at the leather-bound menu before looking at Emma. "I'll let you order for both of us. After all, you're my guide." The unexpected gesture made her pulse flutter. She hesitated but nodded. "We'll have the chef's tasting menu, please," she said softly, "and a simple Bordeaux to pair." The waiter bowed, approving of her tasteful choice. Michael smiled. "You're full of surprises, Emma." "I watch a lot of documentaries," she said, half joking, trying to hide the nervousness rising inside her. He chuckled quietly. "You're doing more than you know." As the courses arrived, delicate portions of seafood, sauces drizzled with artistic precision, Emma coached him through each one. "Outside in," she whispered as he reached for his fork. "Always start with the utensils on the outside." Michael mirrored her movements carefully, his every gesture exaggerated with mock seriousness to make her laugh. At one point, while slicing through a delicate piece of halibut, he glanced up at her with a mischievous glint. "Do I pass yet?" Emma giggled softly, covering her mouth. "You're doing fine, better than half the people who actually belong here." And that was when it happened. As Michael reached for his wine glass, his elbow nudged the stem just slightly too hard. The glass tipped, toppling in slow motion before splashing across the pristine white tablecloth. The rich red liquid spread like a crime scene. Drops splattered onto his sleeve, and the entire restaurant seemed to freeze for a moment, heads suddenly turning toward their table. Emma gasped, immediately leaping up. "Oh no, your shirt!" Michael waved a hand, calm as ever. "It's fine." But Emma was already in full emergency mode. "We have to rinse it before it sets. Come on." She grabbed his arm, practically dragging him across the polished floors toward the restroom. Staff glanced their way, some recognizing Michael, but respectfully saying nothing. "Sir, is everything all right?" whispered one of the head waiters, clearly knowing far more than Emma did. "Just a little spill," Michael answered smoothly, allowing Emma to keep tugging him along. When they reached the restroom door, Emma paused. "Cold water, always cold," she instructed firmly, pointing a finger. "Hot water will ruin it." Michael grinned, utterly charmed. "Yes, ma'am." As the door closed behind him, Emma leaned against the wall, exhaling. Her heart was racing, not from the wine spill, but from how close they had suddenly become. The way his arm had felt beneath her grip. The way his eyes held hers, like she was something precious, something real. "What am I doing?" she thought. "He's my boss, a billionaire, a man completely out of my world." But none of that seemed to matter when she was near him. When Michael returned, his sleeve damp but clean, Emma smiled softly. Crisis averted. Michael leaned in slightly. Best lesson so far. Which part? The etiquette or the rescue? His voice dropped just above a whisper. Emma's breath caught, and for a moment, she forgot where they were. The waiter returned, breaking the spell. "Shall I continue with the next course, sir?" Michael straightened, never taking his eyes off her. "Yes, please do." But in that moment, the simple lessons and rules faded into something else entirely. Something neither of them was ready to admit. Something quietly, irrevocably dangerous. Chapter 4. The Shopping Transformation. The Macy's on 34th Street buzzed with weekend shoppers, their bags swinging as they moved between racks like determined soldiers on a battlefield. But none of them were on a mission quite like Emma Rodriguez. "This," she announced, pointing to a neatly folded display of tailored suits, "is where your transformation officially begins." Michael followed behind her like a quiet shadow, hands in his pockets, a faint smile pulling at his lips. "I thought I was doing okay so far." "You were doing okay for a man pretending to be rich," she teased, glancing over her shoulder. "But if you want to blend into these circles, you need to look like you belong. Naturally. Effortlessly. That's where clothes come in." He chuckled softly. "You make it sound like espionage." "In a way, it is," she replied with a grin. "The wealthy have their own silent codes. You don't want to scream, 'New money, who just won the lottery?' You want quiet confidence. Subtle details. Understated quality." Michael raised a brow. "You've thought about this a lot." She gave a self-conscious shrug. "You pick up things when you work behind the front desk of a luxury hotel for 4 years." Emma led him through racks of blazers, shirts, and slacks. She handled each fabric between her fingers like a curator selecting art. "This one's too flashy. This one's too loud. This too desperate. Ah, this." She pulled out a navy blue Hugo Boss suit, her eyes brightening. Simple, sharp, timeless. Michael gently touched the sleeve. "You really have an eye for this. It's not hard when you see the worst mistakes every day." She flashed him a playful glance. "You'd be amazed how many people think glitter equals wealth." He smiled. "So you're teaching me how not to glitter." "Exactly." A salesperson approached, middle-aged, perfectly manicured, wearing the polite, cautious smile of someone trying to size up whether this was a big sale or a waste of time. "Good afternoon," the man greeted. "May I assist you both today?" Emma took over without hesitation. "We'll need a full wardrobe. Suits, shirts, ties, shoes. Mid-range pricing. Not flashy. We're focusing on classic sophistication." The salesman glanced at Michael for confirmation, slightly confused at who was in charge. Michael simply nodded, amused. "She knows what I need." "Very good," the salesman replied, leading them toward the fitting rooms. Over the next 2 hours, Emma directed the entire operation like a military strategist. She negotiated bundle discounts, asked about promotions, and challenged every price tag like a seasoned veteran. At one point, she pulled Michael aside and whispered like a conspirator, "Never fall in love with an item before negotiating. Salespeople can smell desperation." Michael watched her with growing fascination. She was different, not like anyone he knew from the world of wealth. She didn't care about brand names or impressing anyone. She cared about value, about getting it right. And every time she narrowed her eyes at a price tag or argued with the sales manager over a 10% discount, he found himself falling just a little further under her spell. Eventually, Michael stepped out of the fitting room wearing the full ensemble Emma had chosen. The navy Hugo Boss suit fit him like it had been stitched around his frame. The crisp white shirt glowed beneath the store lights. The blue silk tie nodded perfectly. Emma's breath caught for a moment. Gone was the man with the wild beard and battered backpack. Standing before her now was every inch the man she'd seen in luxury magazines. Except there was something warmer about him. Something more grounded. She swallowed, finding her voice. "You look like a CEO." Michael chuckled. "Because I am one?" She laughed, flustered. "Because you look the part now." The salesman returned with a calculator. With your selections, and after applying the discounts, your total comes to $1,836.00. Emma beamed. We saved over $200.00. Michael pulled out his credit card, pausing only to glance at her with a fond expression. I'm impressed. You should be. I'm very good at this. And she was. After they left the store, arms full of garment bags, Michael slowed his pace, allowing her to fall into step beside him. Why are you helping me so much, Emma? His voice was softer now, the humor fading into something more vulnerable. Emma blinked at him, caught off guard. Because you needed it. Did I? You said so yourself. She smiled faintly, then added, her voice quieter, and because you remind me a little of myself. Michael turned toward her, genuinely curious. How so? She hesitated. I didn't grow up with money. I still don't have much. And when I first started working here, I didn't know how any of this world worked. I learned by watching, by making mistakes. No one helped me. No one offered advice. I figured it out on my own. She shrugged lightly. You deserve a little help figuring it out too. Michael was silent for a long moment as they walked, the sounds of the city filling the space between them. Then he said quietly, almost reverently, You're a rare kind of person, Emma. His words made her chest tighten unexpectedly. She looked away, afraid her face might betray just how much those words meant. They walked a few more blocks before Michael gently added, Next time, can we skip the suits and maybe do something more casual? Emma raised a brow, like what? A picnic. She laughed. You? A picnic? Isn't that a little too simple for a billionaire? Michael smiled, but this time it wasn't playful. It was soft. Honest. Simple sounds perfect. Chapter 5. Picnic of Truths. The sky above Central Park was painted in soft pastel hues, streaks of pale gold blending into the early evening blue. The spring air was warm, carrying the faint scent of lilacs blooming somewhere nearby. Emma laid out the checkered blanket with practiced hands, while Michael stood nearby, carrying a picnic basket that looked comically overstuffed. I may have gone a little overboard, Emma admitted, glancing at the ridiculous spread she had packed. Michael chuckled. You think? I didn't want you to starve. She pulled out Tupperware containers, paper-wrapped sandwiches, and enough snacks to feed a small army. Besides, this is my grandmother's fault. She always said you can't have too much food on a picnic. Michael sat down beside her, lowering himself onto the blanket with an ease that still surprised her. I'm starting to understand where you get it from. She smiled shyly, but didn't reply. She was still adjusting to the surreal image in front of her. Michael Blackwood, billionaire hotel mogul, sitting barefoot on a blanket, about to eat peanut butter sandwiches like an ordinary man. I have to say, he mused, unwrapping one of the sandwiches, this is my first picnic in... well, I can't remember how long. Emma raised an eyebrow. Let me guess. Your typical lunch involves private chefs and imported wine. Not always, he said with a faint smirk. Sometimes just boardroom sushi. They both laughed, the ease between them growing with each passing minute. For a while they ate in comfortable silence, the sounds of the park filling the air, children laughing, dogs barking, distant chatter blending into a quiet, familiar hum. It was simple, ordinary, and yet, Emma could feel something shifting beneath it all. As the sun dipped lower, Michael leaned back, propping himself up on one arm, studying her. You mentioned your grandmother earlier. Emma nodded, a smile tugging at her lips. Yeah, she practically raised me. Your parents? He asked gently. All around. But they worked all the time just to keep food on the table. She shrugged. My grandmother was the one who taught me how to be practical, frugal, how to make things work when you don't have much. Michael listened carefully, his gaze never wavering from her. She used to say, Emma continued softly, that the world doesn't care if you struggle. But you should never let it steal your dignity. You find a way to survive, even if it means making peanut butter sandwiches, feel like a feast. There was no self-pity in her voice, only quiet resilience. Michael's chest tightened as he watched her. He had met thousands of people in his life, executives, investors, powerful men and women who fought for control over billions. And yet none of them had ever spoken the way she did. Genuine, steady, pure. "You're stronger than you realize," he said. His voice was lower now, almost intimate. Emma laughed quietly, trying to brush away the compliment. "Survival's not strength, it's just life." Michael shook his head. "No, it's more than that. You see things most people ignore. You've built something real with almost nothing." The warmth in his voice wrapped around her like a soft current, making it suddenly harder to breathe. She looked down at her hands, fidgeting with the edge of the blanket. "You make it sound heroic, but I'm just trying to get by." Michael watched her for a long moment, then softly added, "And yet here you are, teaching a billionaire how to eat pizza with a fork." She glanced up at him, eyes sparkling. "Yeah, well, you needed it." They both laughed, but beneath the humor, something far more dangerous flickered. The distance between them was growing thinner, more fragile. As the last bit of sun slipped behind the city skyline, Emma found herself growing braver. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You're clearly not new to this world." Her voice was careful but direct. "You know how to behave in fancy places. You didn't really need my help." Michael's smile faded slightly, and for the first time, there was a faint vulnerability in his eyes. "Why did you go along with it?" she finished softly. "With me?" He exhaled slowly, as if debating how much to reveal. "Because no one's treated me like a person in a very long time." His answer hung in the air between them. "In my world," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "everyone sees the name, the company, the money. They calculate what they can gain or lose from me. But you didn't see any of that. You offered me $5 for a sandwich." Emma flushed, embarrassed all over again. "I thought you were homeless." "That's exactly why it meant something." His voice cracked slightly. "For the first time in years, someone cared if I was hungry. Not because I'm Michael Blackwood, but because I looked like someone who needed help." Her heart thudded painfully at his confession. She had never imagined that someone who owned entire skyscrapers could sound so lonely. "I guess," she said softly, "sometimes the people who seem to have everything are the ones who need the most." He held her gaze for a long, silent moment. "You have no idea," he whispered. The evening wind stirred, brushing Emma's hair across her cheek. Without thinking, Michael reached forward and gently tucked a strand behind her ear. His fingers lingered for just a moment too long. Her breath hitched, her heart pounding now in a rhythm that was no longer steady or safe. But neither of them moved. Neither of them pulled away. The air between them pulsed, heavy with something they both felt but couldn't yet name. In that moment, beneath the soft glow of the park lights, the man who pretended to be poor and the woman who never knew wealth found themselves caught in a quiet, dangerous gravity. One that neither of them could escape for much longer. Chapter 6. The Private Investigation. The morning after their picnic, Emma stood behind the front desk of the Grand Plaza, staring at the lobby clock as it ticked slowly toward noon. But she wasn't focused on the time. She was thinking about him. Every smile, every soft glance, every strange little slip. She'd tried to push the suspicions aside, but they kept tugging at her chest like invisible strings. Michael Blackwood, the man who spoke German to someone on the phone. The man who understood fine dining far too well. The man who carried himself like he'd always belonged in the most expensive rooms, even when wearing a backpack. And yet, when she met him, he'd accepted her $5 bill like he actually needed it. Something wasn't adding up. "Emma, you okay?" Tony's voice broke her spiral. The head of hotel security walked by, watching her with raised brows. "Yeah, fine." She forced a quick smile. Tony narrowed his eyes like he didn't believe her but kept walking. Emma's stomach twisted. She hated feeling paranoid. She didn't want to believe that the man who ate peanut butter sandwiches in the park with her could be hiding something so big. But if she didn't know who he really was, what did she really know at all? By mid-afternoon, she couldn't take it anymore. She waited until the lobby was quiet, then slipped behind the staff-only door and into the tiny security office where Tony, was scrolling through camera feeds. "Tony?" she asked gently. He glanced up. "Hey, what's up?" She hesitated, lowering her voice. "Can I ask you something, off the record?" Tony arched a brow. "You planning to rob the place?" She smiled weakly. "Not quite." She stepped closer. "That guest, Michael Blackwood?" Tony froze slightly, choosing his words carefully. "Yeah, what about him?" Emma hesitated. "Do you know anything about him?" Tony exhaled and leaned back in his chair. "Only what everyone at corporate knows. He owns the chain. Billionaire. Keeps a low profile, doesn't like press, private as hell." Emma's pulse jumped. "He owns the hotel?" Tony frowned. "You didn't know?" She tried to stay calm. "No, I mean, yes, I just forgot." Tony gave her a funny look. Why the sudden curiosity? Emma's heart pounded harder, but she forced a casual shrug. "Just trying to avoid any future oops moments, you know?" Tony chuckled, shaking his head. "You mean like offering him $5 for a sandwich?" Emma flushed. "Yeah, exactly like that." That night, back in her tiny Queens apartment, Emma sat cross-legged on her bed, her old laptop balanced on her knees. The screen glowed in the dark room, casting long shadows on the walls. Her stomach twisted as she finally typed the name she'd been avoiding for days. Michael Blackwood. The search results exploded across the screen like fireworks. Forbes, Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal. Blackwood Hospitality Group CEO, net worth estimated at $8 billion. 200 million, 0 cents. Emma's breath caught as she stared at photo after photo. Press conferences, charity galas, ribbon-cutting ceremonies. And there he was in every picture. The same face that had sat across from her on that picnic blanket. The same eyes, the same quiet smile. Her stomach turned violently. It was him. It had always been him. The man she'd been teaching how to navigate high society was the man who built high society. She closed her laptop, pressing her hands to her face as heat flushed her entire body. The memories came flooding in fast. Her ridiculous etiquette lessons, her bargain hunting speeches, the way she'd proudly taught him how to eat pizza with a knife and fork. Oh my God. She had treated one of America's richest men like he was helpless. Worse, he let her. She stood up abruptly, pacing across her small apartment as her emotions tangled together. Anger, humiliation, betrayal. Was he laughing at me this whole time? Was this some sick joke? A game? A charity project? The sting of it burned deep. She had let herself believe she was special to him, that maybe, just maybe, this strange connection they shared was real. But now, she didn't know what to believe. The next morning, Emma arrived at work with a tight, practiced smile on her face. But inside, her nerves were coiled tight, like a spring ready to snap. When Michael walked into the lobby, looking as relaxed and effortlessly handsome as ever, she could barely meet his gaze. "Good morning, Emma," he said softly, smiling like nothing had changed. Her throat tightened. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood," she replied, her voice quieter than usual. He paused for a moment, sensing something was off, but before he could ask, she forced herself to look busy, eyes glued to her monitor. She couldn't confront him. Not yet. Not like this. Not until she figured out whether this had all been a lie or something else entirely. Chapter 7. The Public Explosion. The lobby of the Grand Plaza Hotel was busier than usual. Tourists shuffled in with suitcases, snapping photos beneath the chandelier. A group of Texas retirees argued over their room keys. Across the lobby, two influencers filmed themselves sipping complimentary champagne while their cameraman adjusted the lighting. But Emma Rodriguez didn't see any of them. She only saw him. Michael Blackwood stood at the front desk, speaking quietly with Richard Morgan, the hotel manager. He looked so calm, so relaxed, so perfectly at ease in the world she'd been foolish enough to believe he didn't belong to. The lies buzzed in her chest like static, her breath quickened, her fingers curled into fists. He knew. He had always known. And she had been nothing but a game. Before she realized what her feet were doing, she was already moving, crossing the lobby, every step faster. her heart pounding like a drum. Michael saw her coming. "Emma," he started, his voice warm, almost relieved. But she didn't stop. She didn't slow down. She planted herself in front of him, her voice slicing the air louder than she intended. "You made a fool out of me." Silence rippled through the lobby like a wave. Conversations froze, phones lifted, cameras started recording. Michael's face changed instantly, his calm faltering, his eyes darting nervously toward the gathering crowd. "Emma, can we talk in private, please?" "In private?" She laughed, voice trembling as heat flushed her cheeks. "Like you've been doing this whole time? Pretending?" "Emma, listen." "No, you listen." Her voice cracked, but she pressed forward. "I taught you how to eat pizza with a fork. I made you a manual on how not to be poor. I bargained for your tie like I was helping some poor clueless man figure out how to survive in this world." Her words rang through the vast marble lobby. The tourists leaned in closer. "And the whole time," she choked on the words, tears rising fast, "you were sitting there smiling, letting me—" Michael's jaw tightened. His face flickered with something between shame and helplessness. "I never—" "You own this hotel," she shouted. "You have dozens of $800 shirts, and I used one to wipe lemon sauce off my one nice dress." The crowd gasped softly. Emma's voice dropped into a shaky whisper, her hands trembling now. "You made me feel like I mattered, like I was helping someone. But it was all for your entertainment, wasn't it?" Michael's eyes flashed, pained. "It wasn't like that, I swear." Emma shook her head, biting back the sob trying to break through her throat. "You let me believe I was saving you. You let me think I was helping someone who needed me. And you knew exactly who you were the whole time." Tourists kept filming, phones were everywhere. The two influencers whispered excitedly into their mics. Richard looked horrified behind the desk, whispering rapid instructions to Tony over his earpiece, trying to discreetly control the scene as dozens of hotel guests now watched breathlessly. Michael stepped forward gently. "Emma, please." "Don't." She lifted her hand, stepping back. "I was your little experiment, wasn't I?" she whispered, tears finally breaking free. "Let's see how long the poor receptionist can pretend she belongs in your world." Michael's voice cracked for the first time, quiet but desperate. "Emma, that's not true." "Isn't it?" she breathed. "You investigated me, you ran a background check, you knew everything about me before I even knew who you were." More murmurs from the crowd, phones caught every word. "You violated my privacy, you let me open up to you, you let me dream." Michael's lips parted, as if searching for something, anything, to say that could fix what was crumbling right in front of him. But nothing came. The truth sat between them now, sharp as glass. Emma swallowed the sob, forcing her voice steady one last time. "You know the worst part? For a moment I actually thought you cared." The lobby held its breath. She stared at him, at the man who had been both a dream and a betrayal, and whispered, "You made me believe I mattered." Then she turned and walked away, straight across the lobby, past the influencers, past the tourists, past the recording phones. And as she pushed through the heavy glass doors into the sharp spring air, the hotel lobby erupted into a frenzy of murmurs, videos, and whispered gossip. Inside, Michael stood frozen, watching her disappear through the revolving doors. For the first time in years, surrounded by his own wealth, his own empire, Michael Blackwood had never felt so powerless. Or so completely, utterly alone. Chapter 8. The Viral Aftermath. 3 hours. That's how long it took for Emma's private humiliation to become public entertainment. The first video hit TikTok before she even made it back to Queens. By the time she sat in her tiny apartment, curled up on the couch, her phone was vibrating non-stop with notifications she couldn't bear to check. The titles alone made her stomach twist. Receptionist confronts billionaire boss, epic public meltdown. Hotel employee exposes billionaire CEO's secret life. Rich man's poor girl experiment goes wrong. Millions of views. Millions of strangers watching her worst moment from every possible angle. Every shout, every tear, every painful crack in her voice. Her best friend Jessica called first. "Emma," she said breathlessly, "you're viral, like World-level viral. I know, Emma whispered, her voice hollow. I've seen it. People are calling you a hero. Her hero? Emma nearly laughed, but it came out broken, like something sharp caught in her chest. Jessica lowered her voice, suddenly gentler. Emma, you stood up to a billionaire. On camera. You told him exactly what he did to you. The internet loves you right now. Emma pressed a hand over her eyes. I didn't want anyone to love me for that. I wasn't trying to go viral, Jess. I was just hurting. I know, Jessica said softly. But it's out there now, and people are talking. By morning, news outlets had picked up the story. The New York Post. CEO exposed by hotel receptionist in viral video. The woman who taught a billionaire how to be poor. CNN. Billionaire CEO faces public scrutiny after receptionist's emotional confrontation. BuzzFeed. The most satisfying public takedown you'll see all week. Emma couldn't open her social media without seeing her own face staring back at her, frozen mid-tears, mid-anger, mid-heartbreak. Meanwhile, on the other side of Manhattan, Michael Blackwood sat in his penthouse office, surrounded by silence. The headlines played on the muted television across the room. His publicist's voicemails stacked one after another on his phone. His board members called for emergency meetings. The company's stock wavered slightly under the public backlash. But none of it mattered. Not really. All he could hear was her voice. You made me believe I mattered. His assistant, James, stood awkwardly near the door, waiting for orders that weren't coming. Finally, James spoke softly. Sir, we should release a statement. Michael shook his head, still staring at the frozen TV screen showing Emma's tear-streaked face. Not yet. People are calling it emotional manipulation, James said carefully. Some are even calling it slumming. Michael closed his eyes briefly. He knew the word. Slumming, the term for billionaires who secretly pretend to live as regular people. A twisted hobby for the ultra-rich who wanted to feel grounded, without ever risking anything real. But this hadn't been slumming, not for him. It had been Emma. It had been real. Across the city, Emma did her best to shut out the noise. She called Richard Morgan that morning and officially resigned from the hotel. It's better this way, she said, her voice steady but empty. I can't walk back into that lobby again. Richard sighed heavily. Emma, for what it's worth, none of us blame you. She managed a sad smile. I know, but I can't stay. He didn't argue. A week later, she found herself behind the counter of a small independent bookstore in Brooklyn, Books and Tears, where the owner, Harold, had hired her mostly out of curiosity. You're the girl from the video, right? Harold had asked with a crooked smile on her first day. The whole world's rooting for you. Emma had blushed, wishing she could hide beneath the old wooden counter. I just want something quiet, she said softly. Harold nodded. You'll find it here. The world moves slower in between books. But even as she tried to rebuild something simple, her viral fame followed her. Customers came daily just to meet her. They whispered as they browsed, sneaking glances at the woman who had yelled at a billionaire on camera. Can I take a selfie with you? One young woman asked shyly. You're like my hero. Emma forced another smile, always polite, always careful. She didn't feel like anyone's hero. She just felt exposed. And beneath all of that, what hurt most was that Michael had never reached out. Not once. No apology. No explanation. No fight for her. Maybe that was his answer. Maybe she had never mattered to him at all. But across the city, alone in his cold, glass penthouse, Michael sat staring at his phone. At her number, of the message he'd written and deleted more times than he could count. At the words he still didn't know how to say. I never meant to hurt you. I fell in love with you. Please let me explain. But all he could do was stare. And in the growing silence of his empty life, Michael Blackwood had never felt wealthier in dollars and poorer in everything else. Chapter 9. The Bookstore Confession. It was a rainy Monday morning when Michael finally gathered the courage. The bell above the bookstore door jingled softly as he stepped inside. Books and tears smelled like old pages, warm coffee, and something Emma had created. Something simple, real, and safe. The kind of place Michael had never known, but had secretly longed for. He stood there for a moment, watching her behind the counter. She hadn't seen him yet. Her hair was tied loosely, a pencil tucked behind one ear. She was organizing a stack of paperbacks, humming quietly to herself. The sight of her, ordinary and radiant all at once, pulled something deep inside his chest. For weeks he had lived without her voice, without her laughter, without her impossible fire that had somehow cut through his world of polished glass towers. And for weeks it had been unbearable. Emma finally looked up. Her fingers froze. For a brief moment, neither of them moved. The air between them shifted, heavy, fragile. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. Michael swallowed hard. His voice was lower, softer than she remembered. Emma's heart thudded painfully in her chest. "What are you doing here?" His throat tightened. "I needed to see you." She blinked, trying to keep her composure. "You waited long enough. You could have called." Her voice cracked slightly. "You could have explained a long time ago." Michael stepped closer, but not too close. Careful, respectful. His voice broke as he spoke. "I was afraid you wouldn't want to hear anything I had to say." Emma's jaw tightened. "You let the entire world watch me fall apart, Michael, while you stayed silent. I didn't know how to fix it." His eyes shone with raw honesty now. "I thought if I stayed away, it would protect you, but all I did was make it worse." Her fingers clenched around the edge of the counter. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you pretend? Why did you let me believe you were someone else?" Michael inhaled shakily. "Because for the first time in my life, I didn't want to be Michael Blackwood." Emma's breath hitched. "I just wanted to be someone," he continued softly. "Someone you could talk to. Someone who could sit in a park eating peanut butter sandwiches. Someone who didn't have a name that came with bodyguards and boardrooms." He paused, his voice breaking. "With you, I finally felt like a man, not a title, and I fell in love with that version of myself. I fell in love with you." The words hung between them like electricity. Emma's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back. "You lied to me." "I know," he whispered, "and I would give anything to undo that part. But the rest, everything else, was real. The laughter, the conversations, the lessons you gave me. You made me feel alive again." He reached into his pocket and gently placed something on the counter. It was her handwritten list, the original one. Deco, on how not to look poor. Worn at the edges, folded, refolded, and carried. "I kept it," he said softly. "Every word meant something to me." Emma's lips quivered as she stared down at the paper that had started everything. Michael's voice lowered even more. "You saw a man standing in front of you who looked like he had nothing, and you gave him kindness. Not because you thought he was rich, but because you have a heart that gives even when it's terrified." He finally dared to look directly into her eyes again. "For Granner, always Emma." "That's the woman I fell in love with, Emma." Help, open. Approach, a slope, on a slope. A slag, a hub, a hug, Emma's world swirled in quiet chaos. She wanted to hold on to her anger. She deserved to be angry. But in front of her stood not the billionaire she once imagined, but a man stripped down, vulnerable, afraid, and full of a love she had never truly believed anyone could feel for her. For a long, silent moment, all she could hear was her heartbeat. Finally, her voice trembled. "You hurt me, Michael." "I know. You broke my trust." "I did." His eyes glistened. "And I don't expect forgiveness. But I'll spend the rest of my life proving you can trust me again, if you'll let me." The tears finally broke free, running quietly down her cheeks. And for the first time since that awful day in the hotel lobby, Emma Rodriguez allowed her heart to speak louder than her fear. "I don't need a billionaire," she whispered. "I never did." Michael's chest tightened. "But I loved the man who sat with me in the park. The man who listened, who laughed at my ridiculous coupon lectures, who was kind, even when he didn't need to be. She paused, her voice shaking. That man, I still love. Michael's face broke completely then, the relief, the gratitude, the overwhelming flood of emotion. He stepped closer, slowly, carefully, watching her for any hesitation. And when Emma didn't step back, he reached for her hand. She let him. His fingers laced gently with hers, as if afraid she might still pull away. I promise, he whispered, his voice cracking. No more lies, only truth. Only us. Emma smiled through the tears, squeezing his hand softly. Then start by taking me to lunch. And this time? She paused, her lips curling into a familiar teasing smile. No presidential suites, no fancy rooftop dinners, just a cheap cafe, like regular people. Michael let out a breathless, tearful laugh, a laugh full of quiet, beautiful relief. Chapter 10. The Wedding and New Beginning. 3 months later, beneath a wide summer sky in Central Park, Emma Rodriguez stood at the very place where everything had started. The familiar checkered picnic blanket was gone, replaced now with rows of simple white chairs and strings of soft fairy lights swaying gently above them. The scene wasn't grand, it wasn't extravagant. It was exactly as they wanted. Intimate, warm, quietly beautiful. Emma wore a simple white dress, no designer label, no high price tag, just a gown she found on clearance that fit her like it had always been waiting for her. A pearl necklace, borrowed from Jessica, rested softly on her collarbone. Her best friend adjusted the delicate lace at her shoulder and whispered, "You ready?" Emma smiled, a softness in her chest that still surprised her. "More than I've ever been." Jessica grinned. "Can you believe this? You're marrying the guy who you once tried to send to a hostel with $5. Emma laughed through a breath of nervous joy. "Don't remind me." When the music began, Emma stepped forward, her heart pounding in that way that only comes when a life is about to change forever. And there he was. Michael Blackwood stood at the front of the aisle, waiting, not in a designer tuxedo, but in the navy suit Emma had helped him pick out that day at Macy's. Simple, clean, perfect. Their eyes met instantly, locking across the small distance, and for a moment, the world around them disappeared. No paparazzi, no boardrooms, no viral videos. Just them. Two people who had somehow found each other in a world designed to keep them apart. As Emma reached him, Michael whispered, just loud enough for her alone, "You look breathtaking." She smiled, tears already brimming in her eyes. "You clean up pretty well yourself." The officiant smiled gently at the couple, sensing the weight of the moment. "Dear friends," he began, "today we gather not to celebrate wealth or titles, but love, the kind that surprises us, humbles us, and teaches us who we truly are." Emma felt Michael squeeze her hand, his thumb brushing softly over her knuckles. The officiant continued, "You both come from very different worlds, yet standing here now, you remind us that real love has no class, no status, and no price tag. It lives where kindness lives, where honesty lives, where honesty lives." When it came time for the vows, Michael spoke first. His voice wavered, but never broke. "Emma," he whispered, "when I met you, you offered me $5. Not because you knew who I was, but because you thought I was hungry." A ripple of soft, knowing laughter came from the guests. "You saw me, not my name. You saw a man who needed kindness, not money. And in doing that, you taught me the value of things I had long forgotten. Humility, simplicity, joy, and most of all, love." His voice softened even more. "I don't promise you a perfect life, but I promise you honesty, I promise you patience, I promise you a home filled with laughter, simple dinners, and yes, peanut butter sandwiches whenever you want them." The guests smiled warmly, many wiping away tears. "And I promise," he finished, his voice cracking softly, "to never forget the woman who taught me how to be rich, in ways that money never could." Emma wiped a tear from her cheek before speaking. "Michael, when you walked into my life, I thought I was helping a man who didn't know how to belong in this world." She smiled, voice shaking with tenderness. "But the truth is, you helped me. You reminded me that even in a world full of appearances, there can be people who are kind, who listen, who care. His voice dropped to a near whisper, but it carried across every heart watching. You made me feel like I was seen, like I mattered, like I was more than a paycheck or a receptionist or a girl from Queens. And for that, you gave me a kind of love I never dared to believe was possible. Her eyes glistened and her voice broke sweetly as she finished. I love you, not because of who the world says you are, but because of who you chose to be with me. When the vows ended, neither of them waited for permission. They fell into each other's arms, and as the officiant laughed softly and declared them husband and wife, their kiss sealed not just a marriage, but the healing of two lives that had finally found their way home. Later that night, under soft string lights on the Grand Plaza rooftop, the very place where they'd once danced between confusion and lies, their reception was simple but joyful. Friends, family, staff from the hotel, and even a few bookstore customers gathered, laughing and sharing stories that only a few months ago would have seemed impossible. Richard Morgan gave a short toast, smiling toward the happy couple. To Emma, he said, raising his glass, the woman who turned a billionaire's life upside down and somehow made him richer for it. The crowd erupted in warm applause. Michael leaned over to whisper in Emma's ear, "We really should hang a sign in the lobby." Emma smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "What would it say?" He grinned. "Never underestimate the receptionist." They both laughed, the easy, quiet laughter of two people who finally had nothing left to hide. And as the night faded into soft city lights, Emma looked up at the man who once stood in her lobby wearing a torn backpack and whispered, "You really would have survived that hostel, you know." Michael chuckled. "Maybe, but I never would have survived losing you." And in that moment, beneath the stars and the soft glow of a life neither of them ever expected, they both knew. They were finally home. Together. Sometimes, life leads us to people we never expected. A receptionist who offered $5 to a man she thought was lost. And a billionaire who discovered that all his wealth meant nothing until someone finally saw the man beneath the name. Michael and Emma's story reminds us that love doesn't care about status, titles, or bank accounts. What matters is kindness. What matters is sincerity. What matters is the quiet courage to love someone, not for what they have, but for who they are. In a world obsessed with appearances, they found something far more rare: truth. And that truth gave them everything money never could: trust, forgiveness, and a love built not on perfection, but on simple, beautiful imperfection. And maybe that's the richest kind of life there is. What did you think of Michael and Emma's story? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your rating and what part of their journey touched your heart the most. Don't forget to subscribe for more emotional love stories like this one. And if you believe that real love still exists in a world full of fake, share this video with someone who still believes, too. Thank you for watching.